So I'm really happy that you took the time to be with us here tonight to talk about five outstanding men who, through their books, transformed the course of history, and whom we, to a large extent, can be grateful for, that we today can read the Bible in a language we can understand, in a format we can handle, and at the price that we can afford. This talk of about 45 minutes only has time for an introduction to each five of these. But if the talk can incite you to learn more about one of them or all of them, then I think we will have achieved a very nice thing tonight. You could easily give a talk on just one of these. Actually, I have already given talks on two of these persons before. So there's a lot of literature out there on them, and we'll return to that at the end of the talk. As Danne said, I am a Bible collector myself. I've been collecting Bibles for 35 years or something like that. So when I've got a chance to be a part of the project to establish a Nordic Bible Museum, I grabbed that at once. The museum is run by volunteers. I myself is one of the volunteers. Also, Dan Åke, that serves as a chairman tonight. So let us, and when it comes to my qualifications, they are, I have acquired knowledge through all these years of collecting Bibles, but not only Bibles, but I also collected literature about the Bible, Bible translations, Bible translators, etc. There is no university in the world that will give you a degree in the history of the Bible and the Bible translations, as far as I know. So if you really want to learn about this, you have to take the initiative yourself and dig in. But that is also the most fun way to learn, isn't it? So let us now start looking at these five men. And we will start with the first one. We do it chronologically, and we'll start with the first one. Let me just push the right button here. Let me see. It's hanging. Okay, there it is. Good. That is Jerome, or in Latin, Hieronymus, which is known in many countries. He is what we can call the father of the Latin Bible, and we can call him also like the founding father of all these five that we're going to talk about tonight, because he laid the basis, the platform, so to speak, that the others could build upon. Here we have his resume. I've done it like this for all these five to kind of summarize their life, like we do it on the resume when we apply for a job. And so as I said, his name in Latin is Hieronymus. Actually, it's Sophronius Eusebius Hieronymus, but in English, at least, known as Jerome. Makes it a little bit easier, doesn't it? He was born about 347 in the Common Era in Stridon, Dalmatia, which I'm sure not many know where it was, but it's in a country currently called Slovenia. but he died in another part of the world, in Bethlehem, in about 420. He never married, and he never got any children. So he didn't have any family of his own. So he could devote his life to the study of the Bible and working on the Bible. He came to Rome to study as a young man. It's said that he didn't know Latin at the time when he came there. So he studied rhetoric and philosophy, which was like a good basis education at the time for the upper classes. He came from a wealthy background. But then he later on proceeded with the Bible studies of the Bible in Constantinople, where he finished about the year 81. Throughout his life, he acquired 3 languages: Latin, Greek, and Hebrew. Greek at the time was the common language of the upper classes, the educated people. People in common spoke Latin, which was called the vulgar language. Our English word vulgar, ordinary, comes from this Latin word. But he also learned himself Hebrew, and it's actually just one out of 2 of the old so-called church fathers, these early scholars of the Bible, that most of them became saints in the Roman Catholic Church. There's only one out of actually 2 that really learned to master Hebrew. When we look at his experience, when he came to Rome, he got baptized there, the time when he came there to be there a student. And then he was ordained as a priest, actually, when he started his Bible studies in Constantinople. Thereafter, his career kind of rocketed when he became secretary to Pope Damasius in Rome. And he also gave him the mission to revise the Old Latin Bible, because the Bible had been copied, and faults had sneaked into the manuscripts, and also there were aspects with the Old Latin Bible that were not so seen as satisfactory anymore. So he's given the task to start by revising the Gospels. And then after he had revised the Gospels, he moved to Bethlehem, where he then consequently started to translate the Bible actually from Hebrew into to Latin. And about the same time, he founds a monastery there. Well, most of his life, he benefited from having a very wealthy patron, or maybe you should say matron, a widow that financed his work. So I'm just going to move. I have this box a little bit in my way with a picture of myself. I'll move it down here. Yeah. So the revised Latin New Testament he did in 383. Then he did revise the Psalms, and then he started to translate the Bible from the Hebrew. It finished in 405. At least most of the Bible he translated. And at the time, that was very debated that he did something like that, because the Bible that was venerated at the time was the Greek Bible, the Septuagint. That text was seen as inspired, and many people were critical to it that he would translate it from the Hebrew into Latin. And you remember what I said about the language of the common people? That was Latin, not Greek. So when Jerome did this, he translated the Bible so that the ordinary people could read it. But the task of translating the Bible or revising the Bible has always been one where you make yourself an easy victim of criticism. Jerome said it this way in the preface to the four Gospels that it was addressed to the Pope, the measures who gave him this mission. You urge me to revise the old Latin version and, as it were, to sit in judgment of the copies of the scriptures which are scattered throughout the whole world. And inasmuch as they differ from one another, you would have me decide which of them agree with the Greek original. The labor is one of love, but at the same time, both perilous and presumptuous. For in judging others, I must be content to be judged by all. So I think we can sympathize with Jerome there 1,000 years ago, doing this work. Of course, his autographs, the original manuscripts that he made are long gone, but it can still be seen in thousands of manuscripts, his text. The oldest complete one we have is one called Codex Ametianus. It was written in about year 700 in Northumbria, which is now currently England. And it was given as a pope to Gregory II in 716, and then brought down to Rome. Today you can find it in a museum in Florence, Italy. And in 2018, this was actually loaned to the British Library for a fantastic exhibition of Anglo-Saxon manuscripts, and thus returning to England for the first time in 1,300 years. You can see it here at the exhibition. I was at this exhibition, and the book is huge. This Bible is a very, very thick, as you maybe get a glimpse of from the picture. The legacy of Jerome and his Bible is enormous. It was the dominant Bible for 1,000 years. And many of the first translations into modern languages like English, German, etc., were from the Vulgate. And as we will see, it was the first printed book, the Gutenberg Bible. And before the year 1500, within less than the first 40 years or so of the history of printing, more than 90 editions were printed of the Vulgate. And before the year 1600, 483 editions of the Latin Bible, most of which being Vulgate, were printed. And it's also the starting point of many Catholic translations into modern languages. The Wikipedia sums it up this way: for over 1,000 years, the Vulgate was the most commonly used edition of the most influential text in Western European history. Society. Indeed, for most medieval Western Christians, it was the only version of the Bible ever encountered. The Vulgate's influence on Latin culture throughout the Middle Ages and the Renaissance into the early modern period is even greater than that of the King James Version in English. For Christians during these times, the phraseology and wording of the Vulgate permeated all areas of culture. And Jerome lives through his book even today, because the Vulgate is still the official translation of the Catholic Church, the last one being revised in 1986. And it still has a significance when it comes to what we call textual criticism, to establish the original text of the Bible, because it's actually older than the Masoretic text of the Hebrew Bible. At the museum, we have the oldest part of the Vulgate we have is a sheet, or the so-called Paris Bible, from the year 1250, about the year 1250. And then we have a complete Bible from 1487. It's actually the second Bible in the world with a title page. And then we have the Clementine Revolution that was made of the Catholic Church in 1593 and was the official Catholic Bible until 1979. And in the collection, we have a number of other Vulgate Bibles, including a number that were actually printed before the year 1500, so being among the world's oldest printed books. Now, from Jerome to the next on the list, we have 1,000 years of history where the Bible continues to develop as a manuscript. We get illustrated luxury editions like the one we saw. We get the Paris Bibles that I mentioned. We have a sheet from. And the Paris Bibles were a revolution because for the first time we got Bibles that were handy, you could put in a pocket, and relatively reasonable. So they were available for more people. And you also got the standardized format and layout and sequence of the books. We get the first universities. Latin changes from being the language of the common people into the language of the elite that the common people do not understand. And then about the mid of the 1300s, we start to get Bibles in the vernacular languages. That is the languages that people in common speak. So then towards the middle of the 1400s, we come to an inventor, entrepreneur, businessman, Gutenberg, the father of printing, and his book, the Gutenberg Bible. Gutenberg, he also had a more difficult name. Johannes Gens Fleisch zur Laden zum Gutenberg. He was born about 1400 in Mainz. Actually, there's much more we don't know about Gutenberg than we know about Gutenberg. We don't know exactly when he was born, although we know it was in Mainz on the Rhine River in Germany. And we know that he died in 1468. But we don't know if he had a wife or children. We don't know what he looked like. Well, we don't know what Jerome looked like either, for that matter. But of course, now Johannes Gutenberg is 1,000 years closer in time, and you had a lot of painters and stuff at the time, even though we didn't have any photographers. But there's no contemporary portraits of Gutenberg. And we don't even know his grave, because the graveyard where he was buried is long gone. But there are some things we know about him also. We know that he trained as a goldsmith. And we also know that his languages would be German and also Latin, that he would master Latin. We don't know how he really developed this invention, but we think it was a combination of his experience as a goldsmith, where you would use metals and make them liquid, put them in forms, etc. And then the wine industry in this area, still there today, and the wine presses that they used, and his business instinct. He saw that people were willing to pay enormous sums of money for manuscript Bibles, and if he could find a way to make many copies at the same time, that was big business. So in order to accomplish this huge project, he partnered up with a businessman, Johannes Fust, about the year 1450. So then a few years later, in 1554, the result of this work comes to the market. The complete Bible in Latin, the Vulgate translation, in a beautiful 2-volume edition. About 180 copies were made, and a few of them even printed on the vellum or parchment, fine leather. Here we have the Gutenberg Bible. This is a picture of a facsimile edition that we sell at the museum. It's such a beautiful book. It's really a miracle that the first printed book is still reckoned as one of the most beautiful books in the world. Just look at it. The project was enormous. It's very difficult for us to understand. Not only was this experiment, he was experimenting all the way along, all the different forms of technology, materials that were involved in his production. But we can understand something about the cost of this when we see that it required 50,000 sheets of paper, including, and then in addition, all the sheets that would be on a very costly, even more costly leather, parchment. But even that paper at this time was very expensive. Paper will represent 40% of the production cost of a book in the early history of printing. And each completed book had 1,286 large folio pages, almost 50 centimeters tall. So a huge project, and about 49 copies are existing today. Victor Hugo, the French author, said that the invention of printing is the greatest event in history, the mother of all revolutions. Because of this, the impact of this technology, Gutenberg has been called the father of mass communication. And this invention made possible both the humanism and the Reformation. And because it made publishing possible, it is also the foundation for modern science. And last but not least, in our context now, it enabled the distribution of Bibles in the vernacular in big quantities to price that many more people could afford than the old manuscript Bibles. At the museum, we have on permanent exhibition an original page from the Gutenberg Bible. It's the only one on permanent exhibition in the Nordic countries. And we also have, as a part of the permanent exhibition, a beautiful facsimile edition, or actually two facsimile editions of the Bible. Of the existing Gutenberg Bibles in the world, not two look the same, because Gutenberg had all the text printed in black, and then the initial letters and the name of the books, etc., and illustrations in the margin were put on by different artists. So therefore, they don't look the same. So Gutenberg starts the printing revolution. And this is something that really gained speed very quickly. Gutenberg himself did not benefit from this. Didn't make money from it. Actually, he went bankrupt because of it, because his partner made him bankrupt. And he died in 1568 without having seen the full impact, the impact of his invention. But the printing revolution caught speed so quickly. So by the year 1500, so just about 40 years after Gutenberg Bible, in Venice, in Italy alone, there were 151 print shops. 151, just after 40 years. That is only in Venice. So it's also speeded up humanism and interest in Hebrew and the Greek, because many of the early works were printed in these languages. And it started, we could say, the pre-Reformation, leading up to the Reformation. And this prepares the ground for the third man on our list, Erasmus, the father of the Greek New Testament, and his book. Erasmus was born 2 years before Gutenberg died in 1466 out of wedlock. He was son of a priest in Rotterdam and a maid, so he did not come from a very fashionable background. Also, Erasmus had a more difficult name, Desiderius Erasmus Rotterdamus. And he would die in 1536 in Basel, Switzerland. And he also never married and never got any children of his own. So he could also spend his life in academic study and pursuit, and as a writer. And that he certainly did. He took an interest in the languages and literature very early on. Studied both in the Netherlands, where he came from, in France, and in England, and in Italy, actually, where he got a PhD in theology in 1506. And the languages he mastered were Dutch, Latin, and Greek. Dutch was like a mother tongue to him. Latin was like a mother tongue to him, but to learn himself Greek to master it perfectly, actually. His career started out as an Augustine monk in 1488. He didn't really want to go to the monastery, but he was persuaded to it, as he lost his parents very early on. His wards persuaded him to go to the monastery. So he didn't stay there very long. He became a priest in 1492. Then became a secretary to a bishop same year. But then he started traveling. One of the jobs he had was as a proofreader for a famous printer, Aldus, down in Venice in 1506. Like I said, Venice was like a printing hub of Europe at the time. But his travels also brought him to England, where he became a professor of Greek in Cambridge in 1510, and were there for about 5 years. And we believe it's there where he took an interest into getting to know the Greek text of the New Testament better, to reconstruct it. He was a very prolific author. He was actually the best-selling author of his time until Luther came on the scene. And he was like a superstar of humanism. He is called the Prince of the Renaissance. And all the nobles of Europe wanted to be his friend. But his most famous work, and the one that brought him on our list today, is the Greek Testament Greek and Latin Testament, actually, a diglot, that he published in 1516 that then came in subsequent editions. Here we have it. It's the first printed Greek New Testament. But actually the Greek text was not the main purpose of this for Erasmus. He wanted to he wanted to improve upon the Vulgate text. So in order to do that, he translated the New Testament anew from Greek into Latin, and then to prove that this was accurate translation, etc., he put the Greek text alongside the Latin text. So actually, as I said, his focus was on the Latin translation, and not what came to make this work famous, the Greek text. We have a beautiful first edition of this in Nobime, in the museum collection. This is the one we see here. Can you see? It's just so fantastic, isn't it? This is a work from 1516, and look at the beauty and condition of this this book. The influence of Erasmus and his book, the New Testament, is very hard to overemphasize. Over 300,000 copies were in circulation in Erasmus' lifetime alone, and was reprinted at least 69 times between 1516 and 1536. The first edition, the 1516 edition, created an interest in the Greek New Testament and in learning Greek. The 1519 edition had a huge impact because this was the text that Luther translated his New Testament from. And that text became a part of the Luther Bible of 1534. One of the most important books in the history of mankind, the Luther Bible, 1534, because it influenced, it was not only the first translation from the original languages to a modern language, but it also influenced tons of others, including the English. The English come with the 1522 edition of Erasmus, but Tyndale takes the 1522 edition and translates the New Testament for the first time from the Greek into English in 1526. And that, as we will see later, eventually becomes part of the King James Bible of 1611, the most printed and distributed book in the history of humankind. And then we have the French New Testament, the Spanish New Testament, etc., coming along with later editions of the Erasmus New Testament. And his Greek text eventually becomes what is known as the Textus Receptus, which is a dominant Greek New Testament that Bibles are translated from, and all the way until actually the last part of the 1900s of the 20th century. So yeah, this is just a little bit to emphasize that point about Erasmus, that he becomes the start of textual criticism, where with the Textus Receptus, and then this runs into the scientific text of the New Testament, beginning in 1881, we could say, with the Westcott to Hort edition, and continuing until our day, what is now called the Nestle Aland Novum Testamentum Graece. So by this, he also takes a line back to Hieronymus, who were, as you remember, was selecting the Greek manuscripts to find the best texts for the Bible. So the work of Erasmus has a huge impact. It has been said that the Reformation was born because Martin Luther had Erasmus's Greek Testament in his hand. Although Erasmus himself never joined the Reformation, he remained a Catholic. Luther has rightly been called the father of the German Bible. He was a contemporary of Erasmus. He was born in 1483 in the eastern part of the currently German. He married quite late in 1525 to a former nun, Katharina von Bora, and they had 6 children. So he's the only one of the 5 men tonight that we know had children and that we know was married. And then he dies in 1456 in Wittenberg, 10 years after Erasmus died in 1536. He actually started to study law. That's what his father wanted him to do. His father was a miner. Well, he owned a mine, didn't just work in it. Luther claims that the first time that he saw a Bible when he came to university, at about, or that he first saw the Bible at about the age of 20 years old. He had a life experience that changed him. So he disappointed his father and started to study biblical studies in 1508, and then had a rapid career with becoming a doctor of theology in 1512. So the languages that he mastered from childhood was German, and then Latin as a part of the basic education of the time. But then he learned himself to master Greek very well, and also eventually Hebrew well. Yeah, this special experience he had, there was a lightning strike in 1505, where he said to God that if he survived that lightning, he would devote his life to him and go to monastery. So he survived. So he went to monastery, became an Augustine monk, ordained as a priest in 1507, became a teacher at university, 1512. We often talk about Luther as a monk, but he was far more than just a monk. He was actually, by the time of 1515, he was responsible for 11 monasteries. He was the head of 11 monasteries. He became a demonstrator, we could say, with his 95 Theses protest in 1517. And 4 years later, he became excommunicated by the Pope and lawless. That means that anybody could kill him, and they would not be punished for it. On the opposite, they would probably get a reward instead. So friends take him and kidnap him to safety in a castle called Wartburg, where he goes under the nickname of Junker Jörg. And there he has time and peace and quiet to sit and translate the New Testament from Greek into German in just 10 weeks. It's one of the very, very biggest achievements in the history of Bible translation. For not only is this the first translation from the original Greek into modern language in all of history, but he actually, by doing this, establishes the modern German language. Because before this, there was many ways a word could be spelled in German. After this, the way to spell it, correct way to spell it, was how it was spelled in Luther's New Testament and the Bible. The same year, he becomes a professor of theology in Wittenberg, his hometown, and was become the hub for all his for printing and distributing of his publications. Even though he used only 10 weeks to translate the New Testament, he would use 12 years to translate the whole Bible. And despite the fact that he would then have a help from a number of his friends at the university. He is one of the most prolific authors of history. He authored more than 300 publications. He is said to author a publication every second week of his life. But although he would correct his translations of the Bible until his deathbed virtually, we see from this quote that he found it a challenge. He said, "If God had wanted me to die thinking I was a clever fellow, he would not have got me into the business of translating the Bible." So the Luther Bible of 1534 is today on the UNESCO list because of the enormous impact it has had on history. Nobimu has a 1551 edition on permanent exhibition, and in the collection we also have two so-called pre-Luther Bibles, that is Bibles with most of Luther's translations before the official Luther translation of 1534. We have the Swiss Zurich Bible, 1531, and then we have the Low German of 1533. Beautiful works. Here we see the Luther 1534 edition in a colored edition, a facsimile edition that we sell at the museum. Such a beautiful book. There's written a book called Brand Luther, where the author documents how Luther transformed the whole publishing industry. Actually, from before Luther, there were the books for the few. After, the books for the many. It was from books mainly in Latin, the books in language that common people could read. It was from big and expensive to small and inexpensive. And we get title page branding. Actually, Luther had like a marketing agency, his friends and colleagues around him there in Wittenberg, that branded him, his name, and Wittenberg as a printing place, and made kind of front pages of the books and the Bibles that the world has not seen before, especially not at the prices that these were sold for. By the way, Luther never made a dime from his from all the books and translations that he made. It was the printers who made the money. So the Gutenberg Bible is still the most widely used Bible in the German-speaking world, and it came in a new edition and recently, as 2017, in the 500-year anniversary edition of the Reformation. Yeah, this is what I mentioned, what we have at the museum. We also have 1662 edition of the Luther Bible, so-called Kurfürsten Bible, at the permanent exhibition. So when we now move on to the next one, who is also a contemporary of Luther and Erasmus, Luther proved the success of printed Bibles in the vernacular languages. I failed to mention that, but let me see where I have that note on that. Yeah, by the year 1533, no less than 83 editions of Luther's New Testament had been published. That is, in 11 years, 83 editions. And by the year he died in 1546, 430 editions of the Luther Bible, or parts of it, had been published. We now come to the last in our sequence, the father of the English Bible, William Tyndale, and his book. William Tyndale, he was born about 1494. We don't actually know when the year he was born, but it was in Gloucestershire, on the border to Wales in England. But we know that he died in 1536 in Vilvoorde, which is now just outside Brussels in Belgium. And we know that he also never married and also didn't have any children. We don't know what he looked like either. There's no contemporary picture of William Tyndale either. And he was influenced by both Erasmus and Luther. So both of them had a part in creating William Tyndale and his work. And he was the only one of the 5 that we're talking about tonight that died for his life's work. He was educated in Oxford and Cambridge, and trained and ordained as a priest. He was very gifted with languages. He mastered not only English, of course, but also French, Greek, Hebrew, German, Italian, Latin, and Spanish. Started out his career as a house teacher, family pastor. Then when the English bishops would have nothing of him translating the New Testament into English, he moved on to the continent to be able to do it there. And spent the rest of his life on the continent. Was finally trapped, arrested, convicted of being a heretic, and was strangled and burned on a stake in 1536. That was the same year. He died the same year that Erasmus, but a much more dramatic death. So he, as I said, translated the English New Testament from the Greek, the second edition of, the edition number 3 of Erasmus, and translated it into English. And complete edition of New Testament was published in 1526. And then he continued with the Pentateuch in 1530, and then translated some other parts of the Hebrew scriptures as well. William Tyndale once said to a clergyman, "If God spares my life for a few years, I'll see to it that the boy pushing the plow knows more of the Bible than you do." And that mission he held to. Here's a picture of Tyndale New Testament, by the way. The British Library website says that without the introduction of printing with movable type in the Western world by Johannes Gutenberg in Mainz in the 1450s, Tyndale's work would not have spread so quickly, and his impact on the world and on the English language would not have been felt so strongly. Once the floodgates had been opened and people had become used to hearing the word of God in English, the authorities realized that there was no going back and began to publish authorized editions. So we see here how the lines from Tyndale goes back to Erasmus, Greek Testament, Gutenberg, with the printing technology, and also he also owed a lot to Luther in setting the example first for him. I said that you can today find Tyndale in the King James Version, and it's believed that 85% of the King James Version New Testament is actually Tyndale's word. Here we see the so-called kind of family tree from Tyndale to the first printed Bible in English, so-called Coverdale version in 1535, etc., etc., down to the King James Version in 1611, and then in its later, you could say, additions, revisions, up until our day. So there is a very good reason that King Tyndale can rightly be seen to be said to be the father of the English Bible. And through this, he had enormous impact, because the King James Version, the National Geographic said about it, when it had anniversary edition celebrating the King James Bible in 2011, so that's 400 years after the first edition. No other book has given so much to the English-speaking world. As I said, it's the most printed book of all history, and still one of the most best-selling. So we now looked at 5 remarkable men and their even more remarkable books. We have seen how the Jerome's Latin Vulgate found the basis all the way as a translation, as a text, and as an influence for all the later ones coming. Gutenberg took his text and printed as a first printed book. Erasmus was incited by this text to make a Greek New Testament, which Luther then translated into German from, and which then inspired also Tyndale to translate from the Greek into English. And Erasmus would never have been able to distribute his books, including the Greek New Testament, in such big numbers if it were not for the printing technology. The same thing with Luther and Tyndale, and Luther would surely not have survived if his works had not been spread so quickly. Otherwise, he would have been caught by the church and executed like Tyndale was also. So, to summarize in another way, all these 5 men knew Latin. All but one remained single, childless. All but one were priests. Gutenberg was not a priest. And the one who had children was Luther, we remember. All but one knew Greek. Erasmus was the one who didn't know Greek. All but one were Bible translators. Gutenberg did not translate, he printed. All but one translated from the original languages to a vernacular. Gutenberg did not translate. All but one were very prolific authors. Gutenberg, again, he did not write anything. All but 2 we do not know what look like. We only know what Luther and Erasmus look like. The other 3 we do not know look like. All but 1 we have their own words. We have words from Jerome that lived 1500 years ago or more, but we don't have any words from Gutenberg. Not a quote from him. None of them made much profit from their books. And one went bankrupt because of his book, that was Gutenberg. One died for his book, that was Tyndale. But together they made the 5 most influential books of history, and they were all Bibles. And 3 of them lived at the same time in the 1500s. What a remarkable time. And finally, all were instrumental in the transmission of the Bible to our day. Just as I said, I hope this can incite you to want to learn something more about this. And this is 3 of my favorite books, not because they are the most heavy on the text. They have excellent texts as well, but they are certain beautiful books with very, very lavishly illustrated. And even the Wikipedia, although it's not so beautiful, has a lot of good information on these subjects. We have beautiful books in the museum shop. This here this is the world's smallest edition of the Gutenberg Bible in 2 volumes. It's published by the Gutenberg Museum in Mainz, Germany, and it combines two of the ones we talked about tonight. That is the Jerome and his Vulgate text, and Gutenberg. And we also have at the museum shop, we have a beautiful facsimile, large facsimile of Gutenberg Bible, 2 volumes plus a commentary volume. Here you can see how beautiful it is. And then we have the Luther Bible facsimile, also very beautiful, 2 volumes as well plus a commentary volume. And then we have the Tyndale New Testament as part of the English Hexapla, which has the English text of the New Testament from the Wycliffe, or translated from the Latin Vulgate, Rome's Vulgate, and Tyndale, etc., until the King James Version. Very interesting to see how compare the English text, and there you can really see how Tyndale's words has been carried through. And then finally, we also have we have several facsimiles of the King James Bible. We have a facsimile of the 1611 edition, and also a facsimile, a large facsimile of the 1769 edition, which is the text that we know as the King James Version in the Bibles that we can go and buy in the store today. So that was the talk. I hope that inspired you to learn more about these 5 remarkable men. Thank you so much.